I'm going to have to leave for work pretty soon, but I figured I could do the third part of my Scott Walker series. And I'm tired. I kind of didn't feel like doing it. And there was a guy outside, like, trimming the hedges, making noise. But I figured that I would leave that in so that the possibility of that um, unwanted noise could kind of be there to sort of add to the ambience of what's going on with this video. But I'm going to try to do my best. So, but he's not making the noise right now. So, um, last we left off, Scott in the 70s did the stuff that I think was the stuff is my favorite of his. The Moviegoer, songs from his television show, Stretch, We Had It All, No Regrets, and Lines with the Walker Brothers. Okay, so I think it's in 78 that, or 77, 78, that the label that the Walker Brothers were on was going to, it was going to go under. And they were doing the album that would become Night Flights. And so, according to 30th Century Man, that was the documentary I referenced, I think, in both other videos. Scott told John and Gary, he was like, those are the other two guys I haven't mentioned before, that like, okay, so the label's going under. This is our chance to get as experimental as we want before it's kaput. Right? So Scott gets experimental big time. This is the album Night Flights that would come out in 78. And it's the opening tracks. The first 4 tracks are Scott's. Basically, they split up the songs. With Scott, you have Shut Out, Fat Mama Kick, Night Flights, and The Electrician. Now, even though this period that we're getting into, this third phase of his career, is not my favorite, there's a lot of stuff on these albums that I do really like a lot. And I have to, in my tired state, force myself to do justice to. Those 4 tracks, it's known and it's mentioned in this book. I've dug my Walker books out of the garage. It's mentioned in this book the fact that the other songs, once you get past the first 4 that are by Scott, by Gary and John, are like really bad. That's what it says. And that's not really true. Like, those songs are what you'd say, they're kind of like tapping into, Gary and John songs are tapping into a little bit of the proto new wave experimental stuff that Scott was probably tapping into, and a little bit of disco. Scott stuff is actually really profoundly good. Shut Out, Fat Mama Kick, Night Flights, which is the title track, and then The Electrician, which is really the standout track. And it's there even though that this is a more electronic sort of album, and that's the theme, and you can tell by the cover, there's still the strings, and The Electrician makes use of the strings and string arrangements in a way that's, it's very sophisticated. It's, you could tell that, like, the stuff that was influencing Bowie on the Berlin albums, which is Low, Heroes, and Lodger, although Lodger is a little bit later, but we have to keep things in trilogy form, so Lodger's part of that. And Lodger does, those 3 albums do break with Scary Monsters, so we'll keep it there. A lot of that stuff, that krautrock stuff, kind of avant-garde music. There's the guy with the, it's not a leaf blower. Why would you use a leaf blower if the wind is as bad as it is today? He's like he's in a chainsaw or something. I love it. Anyways, so that same stuff that Bowie was getting inspired with Station to Station, to up to Scary Monsters. Scary Monsters is it's a little bit more diverse. And I'm going to I'll do some episodes about Bowie for sure. This has got to be influencing Scott. Bowie was into keeping them distinct. Sorry. So they have a lot of the similar influences, and there's been this sort of parallel. There's been a sort of parallel in their careers between Bowie and Scott Walker, especially up to this point, because Scott Walker had been successful in the 60s at a point when David Bowie had not been. David Bowie, you can hear on the BBC sessions, which is a really great collection, especially the first disc. You can hear he's covering Jacques Brel songs, which he had to have, I'm almost positive he picked up because of Scott Walker's versions, because Scott Walker really made Jacques Brel popular. So this is really going neck and neck with Heroes. And according to like critics or rock snobs and whatever, and like this guy who would be both, it's the first 4 tracks on Night Flights that are what's keeping this album in the running with what Bowie's doing. Brian Eno in 30th Century Man even brings up this record and kind of talks about music not really progressing past these first 4 songs. He has a narrower view of things for sure, but I bring it up only to show that he holds it in high regard. I don't think the Gary and John songs are bad. I think they're maybe not as great as Scott's songs, but they're okay. It's nothing to get worked up about. So, Night Flights ends. I have this book. This book kind of talks about the sort of malaise that Scott Walker was kind of in. Because even though he had that creative burst with Night Flights, I think he was kind of doing shows, Vegas-y type shows, maybe Walker Brothers Greatest Hits type shows and things like that, where he was just kind of coasting. And at some point, he kind of got it together and decided that he was going to do a follow-up album, solo album. Maybe there was a sense that his career was over, because there was a point, and they talk about it, I think, in both of those books, where he'd kind of gone to a monastery and had been hanging out there and getting sort of this hanging out with the monks and getting sort of like a religious kind of seclusion from the modern world. Anyways, the light was annoying me, so even if it affects my vision, which is whatever. So maybe Scott was done, but he wasn't, because in 84, yes, he releases Climate of Hunter. And Climate of Hunter it does pick up where Night Flights left off. And the songs are much more meditative. It starts with a song, Rawhide, Dealer, and then 4 of the tracks are just listed: track 3, track 5, track 6, track 7. This album has a very meditative quality. And in 30th Century Man, he talks about how he made a point of not letting the musicians, when they were recording together, he would have the parts sort of laid out, but he didn't want to have them kind of lock in and groove together. He wanted the music to have a certain sense of separation that's kind of unconventional for rock pop music, because rock pop music a lot of times, or whatever, jazz, you kind of want to have this sense that the band members or the band people playing are locking in and getting a groove. His whole thing is to try to avoid getting a groove, right? So what's going on in this album? It's a short album. There's a cover on here, Blanket Roll Blues, too, which was I think a Marlon Brando movie that he just wanted to put on an album. So I think that what's going on here in it, if we're going to speak in avant-garde terms, this is where Scott is actually making music, and he's he's crafting the music and creating the music in ways where it's like blocks of sound that are being juxtaposed with each other or maybe being overlain on each other. He's not trying to he's not trying to make something that's engaging in a traditional way. I guess cuz if you're thinking about making something that's where you're thinking of the music, maybe conceptually thinking of the music in a way that's spatial and not like audio, I guess, or spatially instead of orally, where you're thinking of it as terms of like blocks of sound, then yes, there's an immersive quality, which this album has probably the most of all his later stuff. But maybe it's the way that that immersive meditative quality comes about. It's the construction leads to that. So maybe there's something different about it, right? So he does that, and then he's not going to play live anymore because this is sort of his way of, more than anything else, this is his way of saying like, okay, now I'm a figure in the avant-garde. I'm going to do avant-garde music, and I'm going to be part of one of the things about avant-garde, the avant-garde question that I didn't bring up the last time. I talked about being perturbed and the avant-garde sensibility trying to perturb you or confound your expectations. One of the things that's going to conceptually get classified in there is just difficulty. So you're going to be like difficult. Some of this stuff when I was talking about Zappa, when I was like saying, well, him being like avant-garde, you could say, well, he's being stupid. I was dismissive of it and still am because it's like unnecessarily vulgar. This is the kind of difficulty that it's not vulgar. Scott will do a little bit of vulgarity later, but it's a conceptual difficulty where he's drawing on philosophical, literary, and theological things to make the music what it is, and what it is in an avant-garde sense, which is kind of difficult, right? Now, he doesn't do anything. I think he showed up on some video shows and just they played a music video for one of the songs, and then he did Tilt in '95, 11 years later. So he took a really long time. Tilt is a really good album. It's got a much more, it doesn't have the sort of cohesiveness that there was an article, I should say before I move on. There was an article in, I think it was Mojo. I didn't get it. I looked at it at the newsstand where they talked about there was possibly going to be a sequel to this, and he had the guys from Roxy Music working on it. They worked up a few things, but it was nothing really definite. So that was kind of the direction it was maybe going to go. But he didn't do it. He did Tilt, which came out in '95, and a lot of people, I think, when they're talking about him as far as being like his artistic greatness, they kind of see this as the high water mark. Farmer in the City is about Pasolini's murder. It's a great and haunting song. It also, there's this track on here that he did with a guy, and it's called Man from Reno, that uses some of the elements of Farmer in the City. And I like Man from Reno a lot too. It's a different type of song for sure, but Farmer in the City is where he's really dialed in. It's very filled with dread, because that's like what a lot of what's going on in this album is. It's related to dread. Now the video is long. Like, this is what I wanted to avoid, and it's happening. So you have to bear with me. The Cockfighter, Bouncer See Bouncer, an album, a song on here that people dislike, but some people critically dismiss it. This book is also a track by track analysis of Scott Up to the Drift. Manhattan, he dismisses Manhattan, but I really like Manhattan. I think it's good. And so there's I'd say that this is, yes, it's avant-garde. I'd say that the big influence on here is there's like now, besides using blocks of sound, he's also experimenting with like some industrial sort of things. There's sounds of machines running and stuff. And he's singing, I think there's a woman. I'm not a huge fan of her, but I like some of her stuff. Her name's Patty Waters. She's avant-garde from the jazz thing, coming maybe like Pharaoh Sanders, that sort of thing. She would use her voice as like in a really far out sort of way. He's not exactly doing that, but he is not crooning. He's not trying to make you, he's not using his voice to lull you into security or whatever. It's disjointing. The songs are about sort of like alienation. The machine sounds make you feel like it's probably alienation within like the context of the modern world. And it's a dark album, and it fits with things that were going on at this time, like Coil. I'd say a lot of Coil stuff resonates with this. Right? He worked on a film called Pola X in 1999. It's Pola 10, I guess, because that's the 10th cut of the movie that finally made it. And so he worked on the soundtrack to that. Some of that stuff is on here. It's using samples. So I'd say from 95 to 99, even if he's got like, you know, really outre, or however you want to say, like influences, I think the industrial thing is actually very influential on him. So next we have is The Drift. And this is the album that he did in 2006. And after Tilt, you know, people don't know if he's ever going to come out with more albums, what's going on with him. He's reclusive. He produced Pulp's We Love Life album, which is a pretty good album. The Drift, I'd say, is just as good as Tilt. They're both really good. It's hard to pick my favorite of the two. But The Drift, he's kind of returned to the blocks of sound aspect of this. It's more organic. He's not using machine sounds. He's using much more organic sounds, and the songs as they're constructed are following a much more like I wanted to say intuitive, but it's not intuitive to the listener. They're following his intuition of how the song should be constructed, which really can go anywhere. There's a track on here, I think it's Clara, because now I shut that window, I can't hardly see. That's the song about Mussolini's mistress. That song, it really, there's not, at this point, we could definitely say that we've dispensed with the idea of choruses in a lot of respects. In this one, maybe the idea of a chorus comes up ironically, but he's fully embraced the avant-garde, and he's creating the soundscapes and using blocks of sound, and he's doing all this stuff, and he's doing it with much more organic sorts of tones, and the songs now are following like counterintuitive structures, let's say. I like a lot of these songs actually. So it's hard for me to there's a song on here, Jesse, which is about Elvis Presley's stillborn brother. And then there's some other songs too that psoriasis or whatever. They're very interesting. It's just experimental music at this point from him. That's what he's doing, right? And then he did this album, which is Bish Bosh, which I just don't listen to as that often. And you could see it as being an extension of the strategies that are being employed on this album into, you know, a later context. And I'm sure a lot of these song titles are referencing just very obscure things and obscure authors and things like that. But I just was older and I don't feel like really tracking it down. It's just, it's, what is the word? It's very eccentric. You know, I think that what we see going on here is sort of the danger of the avant-garde, where you abandon any sort of commercial aspirations you have, which can be good or bad, but now you might be prey to your own eccentricities. I'd say this album is very prey to its eccentricities. This is also one where he's sort of, bringing in sort of more of an earthy, vulgar sort of aspects into some of these songs, which I guess is where his imagination was taking him. I'm not saying that necessarily is as much a turnoff as it is with some of Zappa's stuff, like "I'll Shake Your Booty" or whatever, but I don't find myself listening to this album as much. But I'm not opposed to it. Then that was 2012. He did "Soused" with Sun O, 2014. The Sun O guys talk about being really bummed out that they didn't get to work with him to the extent that they wanted to, that he sort of told them what he wanted. They tried to create it as best as possible. They didn't have as much of an interactive relationship with him, and then he used those raw materials and created the songs. I think that South is actually better than Bish Bosh, even if it might be flawed in that it might not have the sort of weight that the Sun O guys wanted to give it. The gravity, maybe I should say. But it's returning to, if you could say that this is sort of like his, like some sort of like French foreign film sort of earthy kind of endeavor, Soused returns to sort of the doom and gloom that you would associate with like the peak era, the tilt and the drift, right? So this album, I would say, is a better follow-up to the drift. And it's also, strangely enough, it's because he's using Sun O and their sort of droney structure. It's not as, it doesn't have the unexpected twists and turns that tilt and drift and Bish Bosh have. There's a aural consistency to it. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyways, so, and then he did, a soundtrack for a film about like a dictator or something that's based on some story that Jean-Paul Sartre wrote. I don't really like Sartre for a variety of reasons. And then he passed away in March 2019, March 22nd, 2019. So this is going to be sort of like the capstone on Scott Walker's career. I think outside of that general, and there was a couple like instrumental sort of EP things that he did that I just didn't pick up because I'm not a completist, but I do have a lot of Scott Walker and I do listen to a lot and I like a lot of it. I think that if we're talking about this third period, I think you definitely can't go wrong going from Night Flights to Climate of Hunter. And then, if you have the venturing into the drift or venturing into tilt, for sure, it does take a little while to sort of get into. But it's a long video. It's going to be 25 minutes. But that's it. That's Scott Walker. And he, he's a really worthwhile artist for you to get into. And so if you like this video, like, subscribe, comment, and, go listen to the Happy Casualties.